in the secluded village of Hollow Creek. Hannah and her daughter Lila, born with a rare condition that covers her body in soft fur, face fear and prejudice from the community. As whispers turn to hostility, the brave little Lila wins hearts by saving a boy during a storm, challenging the villagers' perceptions. With the support of Jake, a kind neighbor, and Clara, the wise elder, Lila slowly transforms the village's fear into acceptance. However, Amos, the voice of suspicion, continues to resist change, embodying the struggle between fear and understanding. As Lila's courage inspires a new tradition celebrating diversity, the story leaves an open-ended question about belonging and the journey toward acceptance. What did you think of this story? Are you watching from the US, the UK, or somewhere else? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to DG Stories for more inspiring tales like this one. Hollow Creek had always been a place of whispers, nestled deep in the Appalachian Valley. It was a village out of time, a secluded hamlet where traditions were as unyielding as the mountains that cradled it. Stories of strange creatures lurking in the woods or phantom lights dancing across the hilltops had been passed down for generations. Here, difference wasn't celebrated. It was feared. Hannah knew this well. She had heard the stories from her grandmother when she was a child, sitting by the fireplace on cold winter nights. But she never imagined she would return to this isolated village, especially not as a widow with a 6-year-old daughter in tow. Yet, life had a way of pushing you to places you never expected. The day Hannah and Lila arrived, the village square fell silent. Hannah had seen Hollow Creek as a refuge, a place to rebuild after the tragedy that had upended their lives. But the people of the village didn't see them as weary travelers seeking solace. They saw Lila. Lila was no ordinary child, born with hypertrichosis. Her body was covered in a fine layer of soft, dark hair. To Hannah, Lila was perfect. Her curious hazel eyes, infectious laughter, and boundless energy made her a light in Hannah's darkest days. But to the villagers, Lila was something else entirely. As they walked through the square, whispers followed them like shadows. Who are they? Did you see the child? Covered in fur. Must be cursed. Nothing good will come of this. Hannah tightened her grip on Lila's hand. Don't mind them, she murmured. Lila, too young to fully grasp the weight of the stairs, skipped beside her mother, pointing out the colorful flowers in the marketplace. The whispers grew louder as they passed Amos, a grizzled man in his 60s with a reputation for being as stubborn as he was superstitious. Amos had lived in Hollow Creek his entire life. He leaned against the wall of the general store, his piercing eyes fixed on Lila. Nothing good ever comes from outsiders, Amos muttered, loud enough for those around him to hear. Mark my words. But not everyone stared with suspicion. From the corner of the square, Clara watched the newcomers with a knowing look. An elderly woman with kind eyes and a cane carved from walnut. Clara had seen enough of Hollow Creek stubbornness to know how it worked. She approached Hannah as the murmurs around them swelled. Welcome, Clara said, her voice cutting through the noise. You must be Hannah. Your grandmother used to talk about you. Hannah blinked in surprise. You knew my grandmother? Clara nodded. She was a good woman, stubborn, but good, like this village. Don't let the whispers get to you. Hannah smiled faintly, appreciating the gesture. Thank you. I'm just here to start fresh. Clara glanced at Lila, who was admiring the carved pumpkins on a nearby stall. Starting fresh is hard here, but not impossible. You'll see. As Clara walked away, Amos snorted and muttered to the group around him. She's too soft. Can't she see what that child is? Trouble. Hannah overheard but chose not to respond. She pulled Lila closer and headed toward the old family farm on the edge of the village. The house, long abandoned, stood shrouded in ivy and silence, waiting for its new occupants. Later that night, as Hannah tucked Lila into bed, she caught her daughter staring out the window at the shadowy woods beyond. Mama, Lila said, her voice a soft whisper. Why does everyone look at me funny? Hannah's chest tightened. She knelt by the bed, brushing a strand of hair, her daughter's and the soft fur on her cheek, from Lila's face. They don't understand you yet, sweetie, but they will. You're special. And sometimes, people are scared of things they don't understand. Lila seemed to consider this. But I'm not scary. Hannah smiled. No, you're not. You're my brave little cub. Lila giggled at the nickname, her laughter breaking the tension in the room. As Hannah kissed her goodnight, she whispered a silent prayer, that Hollow Creek would one day see her daughter for the miracle she was, not the curse they feared. The days in Hollow Creek passed slowly, but not peacefully. Hannah and Lila settled into their new life at the old family farm, which was in desperate need of repair. Hannah worked tirelessly, fixing the roof, tending the neglected garden, and making the house livable again. Lila, with her boundless energy, tried to help, though more often than not, her efforts ended in laughter rather than progress. Despite their efforts to blend in, Hollow Creek refused to accept them. At first, it was just whispers. Amos, never one to miss an opportunity to stir trouble, sat in the village square each morning, regaling anyone who would listen with dark theories about the newcomers. You've all seen the child, he'd say, leaning forward conspiratorially. She's unnatural. Mark my words. They'll bring misfortune to this village. The whispers grew into warnings. One afternoon, Hannah ventured into town to purchase supplies. The general store, usually bustling with chatter, fell silent the moment she walked in. The shopkeeper, a wiry man named Tom, hesitated before serving her, his eyes flickering toward the other customers, who stood frozen, watching her every move. As she paid for her goods, Tom leaned forward and whispered, "You might want to think about leaving, miss. Folks around here don't take kindly to differences." Hannah stiffened but said nothing. She grabbed her bag and left, holding her head high even as her cheeks burned with shame. Lila's experiences were no easier. While Hannah worked in the garden one morning, Lila ventured into the woods behind their home, hoping to find wildflowers. The sunlight streamed through the trees, and Lila hummed to herself as she picked a bouquet of daisies and violets. She didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. "Look, it's her," a voice whispered. Lila turned to find two boys from the village, their faces twisted in a mix of curiosity and mockery. They were older than her, maybe 9 or 10, and clearly emboldened by each other's presence. "What are you doing here, furry freak?" One of them sneered. Lila blinked, clutching her bouquet tighter. "I'm picking flowers." The second boy laughed. "Flowers? Maybe you should pick a tree instead. You look more like a monkey than a girl." The words stung, but Lila didn't cry. She stared at the boys, her hazel eyes steady. "I'm not a monkey. I'm just like you." "No, you're not." The first boy shot back, stepping closer. "You're weird. You shouldn't even be here." Before the situation could escalate further, Clara appeared, leaning on her cane as she emerged from the trees. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. The boys froze, their bravado melting under Clara's stern gaze. "Nothing, ma'am," one of them mumbled, before the two of them ran off into the woods. Clara turned to Lila, her expression softening. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Lila nodded, though her hands trembled as she held the flowers. "Why do they hate me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "People fear what they don't understand, but that doesn't make it right. You're a brave girl, Lila, and don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Lila managed a small smile. "Thank you, Miss Clara." Meanwhile, Amos's warnings grew louder and more ominous. At a gathering in the church hall, he stood before a crowd of villagers, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "We've seen this before," he said, gesturing dramatically. "Outsiders bringing trouble to our village. And now we've got a child who doesn't look human living among us. It's a sign. I tell you, a sign of bad things to come." Some villagers nodded in agreement, their faces etched with unease. Others, like Clara, remained silent, their disapproval evident in their folded arms and narrowed eyes. "What are you suggesting, Amos?" Clara finally spoke, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I'm suggesting we think long and hard about whether we want them here," Amos replied, "before it's too late." The tension came to a head one rainy afternoon when Hannah and Lila visited the village market. The rain had driven most people indoors, but a few stalls remained open. Hannah tried to focus on her errands, but the stares and whispers followed them as usual. As they passed a fruit stand, Amos appeared, his broad frame blocking their path. "You've got some nerve coming here," he said, his voice low but menacing. Hannah squared her shoulders. "I'm just here to buy fruit, Amos. Same as anyone else." Amos smirked. "Is that so? Or are you here to spread your curse further?" Lila, clutching Hannah's hand, looked up at the man with wide eyes. "We're not cursed," she said softly. Amos sneered. "Then what are you, little one? Because you sure don't look like the rest of us." Before Hannah could respond, Clara stepped in, her cane tapping sharply against the cobblestones. "Enough, Amos. This is a marketplace, not a courtroom. Let the girl and her mother go about their business." Amos glared at Clara but said nothing, stepping aside with a muttered curse. As Hannah and Lila walked away, Clara called after them, "Don't let him get to you. He's all bark and no bite." But as Hannah glanced back at Amos's scowling face, she couldn't shake the feeling that his bark might soon turn into something far more dangerous. The tension in Hollow Creek showed no signs of easing. For Hannah, every trip into town felt like walking into a storm. The stares, the whispers, the deliberate avoidance. And yet, the farm was coming to life again. The once abandoned fields were beginning to yield crops, and the old house was gradually transforming into a warm, welcoming home. But there were limits to what Hannah could do alone. The physical labor was exhausting, and the emotional toll of protecting Lila from the hostility of the villagers left her drained. She hadn't expected help. But then Jake appeared. Jake was a widowed farmer in his late 30s, whose property bordered Hannah's land. With a rugged appearance and a reserved demeanor, he was the kind of man who spoke only when necessary. One morning, as Hannah struggled to fix the broken fence along her property line, Jake approached, carrying a toolbox. "Need a hand?" he asked gruffly. Hannah, startled, looked up from where she was kneeling. "Oh, I didn't want to bother anyone." Jake shrugged. "Doesn't bother me. That fence has been falling apart for years. Figure it's about time someone did something about it." Without waiting for a response, he knelt beside her and began working on the fence. Over the next few hours, Hannah learned that Jake wasn't like the other villagers. While he was aware of the rumors surrounding her and Lila, he didn't seem interested in gossip. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, offering quiet but steady support. As they worked, Lila appeared with a basket of wildflowers. She paused, staring at Jake curiously. "Who are you?" she asked. Jake glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Name's Jake. I live just over there." He pointed toward his farm. "And you must be Lila." Lila nodded, clutching her basket tightly. "Are you here to help Mama?" "That's the plan," Jake replied. For the first time in weeks, Hannah felt a glimmer of hope. Over the following weeks, Jake became a regular presence at the farm. He helped repair the roof, mend fences, and even showed Lila how to care for the chickens. His quiet kindness was a balm for Hannah's frayed nerves, and his calm demeanor reassured Lila in a way that few others could. One evening, after a long day of work, the three of them sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. Lila leaned against Hannah, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Why are you helping us?" Hannah asked Jake, breaking the comfortable silence. Jake took a moment before answering. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I've seen what this village can do to people who don't fit their mold." Hannah studied him, sensing there was more to his story, but she didn't press. For now, she was simply grateful for the support. While life on the farm was improving, Lila's experiences in the village remained fraught with difficulty. She wanted desperately to make friends, but every time she approached a group of children, they either ignored her or teased her cruelly. One day, while playing near the schoolhouse, Lila overheard a group of children whispering about her. "She looks like a bear cub," one of them said, giggling. "Maybe her mom's a witch," another added. Lila's heart sank. She clutched the wooden doll her mother had made for her and ran back to the farm, tears streaming down her face. Hannah found her in the garden, curled up under the shade of an old oak tree. "They don't like me," Lila sobbed. "They think I'm a monster." Hannah knelt beside her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You are not a monster, Lila. You're my beautiful, brave girl. And if they can't see that, it's their loss." "But why don't they like me?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. Hannah hesitated, searching for the right words. "Sometimes, people are scared of things that are different. Doesn't mean you're wrong or bad. It just means they need time to understand." Lila sniffled. "What if they never understand?" Hannah smiled softly. "Then you'll show them who you really are, one step at a time, and I'll be with you every step of the way." While Hannah worked to rebuild Lila's confidence, Amos continued his campaign of fear. He began circulating rumors that Lila's presence was responsible for a series of minor misfortunes in the village. "A failed harvest here, a broken wagon wheel there. Can't you see?" he told anyone who would listen. "That child is cursed. It's only a matter of time before something worse happens." The villagers, already uneasy, began to listen. Some avoided Hannah entirely, while others openly confronted her. One afternoon, as Hannah returned from the market, she found Amos waiting for her at the edge of her property. "Leaving would be the smart thing to do," he said, his tone cold. Hannah met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." Amos's lips curled into a sneer. "Then don't say I didn't warn you." Despite Amos's efforts, Jake and Clara's support gave Hannah the strength to keep going. Jake, in particular, became a vital ally, not just in maintaining the farm but in challenging the narrative Amos was spreading. During a chance encounter in the village square, Jake confronted Amos in front of a group of villagers. "You talk about curses and misfortune," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. "But the only curse I see around here is fear. You're so busy blaming that little girl. You don't even see the harm you're causing." Amos glared at Jake but didn't respond. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. For the first time, Hannah felt a shift. It was small, barely perceptible, but it was there, a glimmer of hope that the village might one day see Lila for who she truly was. The autumn air was heavy with tension. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the whispers in Hollow Creek grew louder. Amos's campaign of fear had reached new heights, and even the smallest misfortunes were now blamed on Lila. A cracked roof, a missing goat, a bad batch of cider, all became proof of the so-called curse. But for Hannah and Lila, life continued. They focused on their farm, their routines, and the small joys they found together. Jake's steady presence helped keep them grounded, and Clara's occasional visits brought moments of warmth and reassurance. Yet, neither of them could have foreseen the storm that was about to come, both literal and metaphorical. It began with the storm. The wind howled through the valley one evening, shaking windows and rattling doors. Rain poured in sheets, turning the village paths into streams of mud. Most villagers huddled inside their homes, but not everyone was accounted for. A frantic knock on Hannah's door shattered the quiet inside the farmhouse. Hannah opened it to find a young mother, drenched and wild-eyed, clutching her shawl tightly around her. "Have you seen my son?" the woman cried. Hannah's heart sank. "No. What happened?" "He went out to the woods before the storm started. He hasn't come back." Before Hannah could respond, Lila appeared in the doorway, her hazel eyes wide. "I can help find him," she said, her voice firm. "No," Hannah said immediately. her protective instincts kicking in. "But Mama, I know the woods. I can help," Lila insisted, clutching her raincoat. Hannah hesitated, torn between fear and trust. Jake arrived moments later, his face grim. "I'll go with her," he said. "The more eyes out there, the better." Hannah finally nodded, her heart pounding. "Be careful," she whispered, pulling Lila into a tight hug before letting her go. The woods were a maze of shadows and pouring rain. Jake and Lila trudged through the mud, their lanterns barely cutting through the darkness. Lila moved with surprising ease, her small frame darting between trees and her sharp eyes scanning the ground. "He likes to play by the creek," she said, leading Jake toward the sound of rushing water. The storm roared around them, but Lila remained focused. Suddenly, she stopped, her ears twitching slightly as she listened. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Jake strained to listen. At first, he heard nothing but the storm. Then, faintly, came the sound of crying. "This way," Lila shouted, grabbing Jake's hand and pulling him toward the sound. They found the boy huddled under a fallen tree, soaked and shivering. His small face lit up when he saw Lila. "I was scared," he whispered. "It's okay," Lila said gently, helping him to his feet. "We're here now." Jake wrapped the boy in his coat, and the three of them made their way back through the woods, the lantern's light guiding their way. By the time they returned to the village, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a calm, eerie quiet. Villagers gathered in the square, their faces a mix of relief and confusion as Jake and Lila emerged from the darkness, the boy safe in their care. The boy's mother rushed forward, sweeping him into her arms. "Thank you," she sobbed, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Lila stood beside Jake, her wet hair clinging to her face, mud streaking her coat. For a moment, the square was silent as the villagers stared at her. "She found him," Jake said, his voice cutting through the tension. "If it weren't for Lila, he'd still be out there." A few villagers murmured in agreement, but Amos stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "This doesn't change anything," he said sharply. "The storm, the misfortunes, it's all connected. That child is still a curse." "Enough, Amos," Clara's voice rang out, stronger than anyone had expected. She stepped forward, leaning on her cane but standing tall. "That girl just saved a life," Clara continued. "While you've been spreading fear and hatred, she's shown more courage than half this village put together." The villagers exchanged uncertain glances. Amos opened his mouth to argue, but the boy's mother interrupted. "She saved my son," the woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "That's all that matters to me." The tide began to turn. One by one, villagers approached Lila, offering quiet thanks or words of praise. A farmer handed her a blanket. A baker promised to bring fresh bread the next day. Even the children, once so cruel, looked at her with a mix of awe and newfound respect. But not everyone was convinced. Amos glared at the crowd, his fists clenched. "You're all fools," he spat. "This doesn't change the truth." As he stormed away, the villagers didn't follow. For the first time, Amos's influence seemed to falter, and in its place, a fragile hope began to grow. That night, back at the farmhouse, Hannah tucked Lila into bed, her hands trembling as she smoothed the blanket over her daughter. "You were so brave," Hannah whispered, tears filling her eyes. Lila smiled sleepily. "I just wanted to help." "You did more than help," Hannah said. "You showed them who you really are." Lila reached for her mother's hand. "Do you think they'll stop being afraid now?" Hannah hesitated, then nodded. "I think some of them will, and the ones who don't, we'll show them, one step at a time." As Lila drifted off to sleep, the storm outside finally gave way to a clear, starry sky, for the first time since arriving in Hollow Creek. Hannah allowed herself to believe that they might truly find a home here. The morning after the storm, Hollow Creek was unusually quiet. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves, and the streets were scattered with debris from the storm. Yet, the village itself seemed different. Word of Lila's bravery spread quickly. The story of how the strange child had ventured into the storm to save a boy had traveled from house to house, weaving itself into the fabric of the community. Hannah was in the garden, tending to the fallen branches, when she heard a knock at the door. Lila peeked out from behind her mother as Hannah opened it to find the boy's mother standing there, holding a freshly baked pie. "I wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice soft but earnest, "for everything. If it weren't for Lila." Her words trailed off as she looked down at the little girl, a warm smile spreading across her face. "You're a hero. You know that." Lila blushed, hiding behind Hannah's skirt. "She's just a kid," Hannah said, though her heart swelled with pride. "Maybe," the woman replied, "but this kid did what none of us had the courage to do. That means something." As she handed over the pie, she added, "If there's anything you need, anything at all, just let me know." It was the first act of kindness from a villager since Hannah and Lila had arrived, and it wasn't the last. Over the following weeks, more villagers began to reach out. A farmer offered to lend his tools to help repair the barn. A baker dropped off a loaf of bread. A seamstress gave Lila a scarf she had knitted, saying, "Every hero needs to stay warm." For the first time, Lila felt like she was part of something. The children who had once teased her now invited her to play, and while some were still hesitant, others eagerly included her in their games. One afternoon, Lila returned home with her pockets full of acorns and a grin on her face. "Mama, they let me play tag with them," she exclaimed. Hannah knelt down and cupped her daughter's face. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." But not everyone welcomed the change. Amos remained resolute in his beliefs, and his discontent began to fester. He gathered a small group of like-minded villagers, whispering warnings about the dangers of forgetting the old ways. "She may have saved a boy," Amos said to his followers one evening. "But don't let that fool you. This isn't over. Mark my words, that child will bring trouble." The group murmured in agreement, but their voices lacked the conviction they once had. The tide of the village was shifting, and even Amos couldn't ignore it. The tension came to a head one crisp autumn morning. Hannah and Lila were walking through the village square, the sun casting golden light over the cobblestones. People greeted them with smiles and nods, and Lila carried a small basket of apples she had traded for at the market. As they passed the general store, Amos stepped into their path. His presence was as imposing as ever, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "This doesn't change anything," he said, his voice low but cutting. Hannah stopped, pulling Lila close. "What doesn't change?" "Amos, you think a few good deeds make everything better?" he sneered. "You think we've forgotten what she is?" Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Before Hannah could respond, Jake appeared, his tall frame casting a shadow over Amos. "Enough," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. "You've done nothing but spread fear. Amos, maybe it's time you stopped talking and started listening." The villagers around them murmured in agreement. Clara, standing nearby with her ever-present cane, added, "Fear has ruled this village long enough. It's time for something better." Amos's face darkened, but he said nothing more. He turned on his heel and stalked away, his defeat palpable. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Hannah and Jake sat on the porch, watching Lila play in the yard. "She's stronger than I ever imagined," Hannah said, her voice filled with awe. Jake nodded. "Kids are like that. They surprise you." Hannah turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Why do you think Amos can't let go, even now, when so many people are starting to see the truth?" Jake sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Fear is a powerful thing. Some people hold onto it because it's easier than facing the unknown." "Do you think he'll ever change?" Jake hesitated. "Maybe, but it's not about him anymore. It's about Lila, and what she's already done. She's changing this place, whether Amos likes it or not." That night, Lila crawled into bed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mama, do you think they'll always like me now?" she asked. Hannah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I think the people who matter already do, and the ones who don't, will keep showing them, one day at a time." As Lila drifted off to sleep, Hannah sat by the window, staring out at the village lights flickering in the distance. For the first time since arriving in Hollow Creek, she felt a sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, felt possible. The Hollow Creek Harvest Festival was the highlight of the year, a celebration of abundance, community, and tradition. The village square transformed into a vibrant tapestry of colorful banners, overflowing baskets of apples and pumpkins, and hand-carved lanterns that would light up the night. For Hannah and Lila, the decision to attend had not been an easy one. "What if they say something mean?" Lila asked quietly as Hannah braided her hair. Hannah knelt in front of her, meeting her gaze. "You've shown them who you are, sweetheart. This is your home as much as it is theirs. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Jake arrived at the farm just as they were preparing to leave. "You ready?" he asked, his reassuring smile easing some of Hannah's nerves. "As ready as we'll ever be," Hannah replied. The festival was already in full swing when they arrived. Children darted between the stalls, their laughter filling the air, while the aroma of roasted corn and spiced cider wafted through the square. As Hannah and Lila made their way through the crowd, the usual stares and whispers followed. But this time, there were also smiles and nods of acknowledgement. "Lila!" a voice called out. It was the boy she had saved during the storm, running toward her with a handmade crown of leaves and flowers. "I made this for you," he said, placing it gently on her head. Lila beamed, her earlier nervousness melting away. "Looks like someone's the queen of the festival," Jake teased, winking at Lila. As the day turned to evening, the villagers gathered around the main stage for the festival's highlight, the lighting of the lanterns. Clara, as the village elder, stepped onto the stage to give the opening speech. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the harvest, but the bonds that hold us together as a community," she began, her voice steady. "This year has been one of challenges, but also of growth. We've been reminded of the strength that comes from embracing one another, even in the face of fear." Clara paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, before continuing. "And there's someone here tonight who has shown us what true courage looks like. Lila, would you come up here, dear?" The crowd murmured as Lila hesitated, glancing nervously at Hannah. "You can do this," Hannah whispered, giving her hand a squeeze. With slow, deliberate steps, Lila climbed onto the stage, her crown of leaves glowing softly in the lantern light. Clara knelt beside her, smiling warmly. This little girl reminded us all of what it means to be brave, to act with kindness even when faced with cruelty. "Lila, we are so grateful to have you here." The crowd erupted into applause, but not everyone joined in. From the edge of the square, Amos's voice cut through the cheers like a blade. "Don't be fooled," he shouted, stepping forward. "This doesn't change what she is. She doesn't belong here." The applause died down as the villagers turned to watch the confrontation. Hannah moved to step forward, but Clara held up a hand, stopping her. "Let her speak," Clara whispered. Lila looked out at the crowd, her small frame trembling under the weight of Amos's words. Then, taking a deep breath, she spoke. "I know I look different," she began, her voice soft but steady. "And I know some of you are scared of me because of it. But I'm not scary. I'm just Lila." She turned to Amos, her hazel eyes meeting his. "You say I don't belong here, but I love this village. I love the trees and the creek and the way the lanterns make the night feel like magic. This is my home too." The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. "I don't want you to be afraid of me," Lila continued. "I just want to be your friend." The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. Slowly, one by one, the villagers began to clap, The boy she had saved cheered loudly, followed by his mother. Then the applause spread like wildfire, until the entire square was filled with the sound. Amos stood frozen, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. But as the cheers grew louder, he seemed to shrink, his influence fading under the weight of the community's support for Lila. Jake stepped forward, placing a hand on Amos's shoulder. "It's time to let it go, Amos," he said quietly. Amos shook him off and walked away, his shadow disappearing into the night. With the tension broken, the festival resumed. Clara handed Lila a lantern and said, "Would you like to do the honors?" Lila nodded, her hands steady as she lit the first lantern. The soft glow spread through the square, followed by the warm light of dozens of lanterns as the villagers joined in. As the lanterns floated into the night sky, Hannah watched her daughter's face, illuminated by the golden light. Lila's smile was radiant, her eyes filled with a joy that Hannah hadn't seen in months. "Do you see this?" Hannah whispered to Jake, her voice thick with emotion. "I do," Jake replied, his gaze fixed on Lila. "She's changed everything." Later that night, as they walked back to the farm, Lila looked up at her mother. "Do you think Amos will ever stop hating me?" Hannah sighed, brushing a strand of hair from Lila's face. "I don't know, sweetheart, but what matters is that so many others see you for who you are now. That's a start." Lila nodded, her steps light as she skipped ahead. The village had begun to change, and while the road ahead would still be challenging, tonight had proven that hope was stronger than fear. The days following the Harvest Festival were filled with a sense of renewal in Hollow Creek. The lanterns from the festival had long since burned out, but their light seemed to linger in the hearts of the villagers. For the first time since Hannah and Lila arrived, the whispers of fear and suspicion were replaced by quiet admiration and cautious kindness. At the farm, Lila's laughter filled the air as she played in the yard with a group of children. Among them was the boy she had saved during the storm and a few others who once avoided her. Now, they raced each other through the autumn leaves, their shouts of joy echoing across the fields. Hannah watched from the porch, a smile tugging at her lips. Jake stood beside her, leaning against the railing. "She's amazing, isn't she?" Jake said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "She is," Hannah replied. "I just hope this lasts." Jake turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "It will. Change takes time, but it's happening. You can see it in the way people look at her now." Later that afternoon, Clara arrived with a basket of fresh apples and a warm smile. She settled into a chair on the porch, her cane resting beside her. "This village hasn't seen a transformation like this in a long time," Clara said, her tone wistful. "It feels fragile," Hannah admitted, "like it could all fall apart if one thing goes wrong." Clara nodded. "That's the nature of change. It's messy and uncertain. But you and Lila have planted something here, a seed of understanding. And it's already starting to grow." Hannah looked out at the yard, where Lila was helping a younger child tie his shoelaces. "I hope you're right," she said softly. Not everyone had embraced the change. Amos had retreated to his home on the edge of the village, his presence less visible but no less unsettling. Though his influence had waned, the scars of his words and actions lingered in the community. One morning, as Hannah walked to the market with Lila, she saw Amos standing by the blacksmith shop. He didn't speak or approach, but his cold stare followed them until they disappeared into the square. "Do you think he'll ever like me?" Lila asked, noticing her mother's unease. Hannah hesitated. "Some people hold on to fear because it's easier than letting it go. But that's their choice, not yours. Don't let it stop you from being who you are." Lila nodded, her small hand gripping her mother's tightly. One evening, as the family gathered by the fireplace, a letter arrived. It was from a research center in a nearby city, offering to study Lila's condition and provide insights into her unique physiology. Hannah read the letter aloud, her voice faltering as she reached the end. "They're inviting us to visit," she said, glancing at Jake and Lila. "They want to learn more about you, sweetheart. Do they want to help me?" Lila asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I think they do," Hannah replied, "but it's a big decision. It means leaving Hollow Creek for a while." Jake leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Do you think it's the right thing to do?" "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "This place is finally starting to feel like home, but maybe there's more out there for Lila. A chance for her to see the world and know she's not alone." Lila's voice broke the silence. "Can we think about it, Mama?" Hannah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll decide together." As the seasons turned, the villagers proposed a new tradition, the Festival of Flowers, inspired by the crown Lila had worn at the Harvest Festival. It was a celebration of diversity, resilience, and the beauty found in difference. On the day of the festival, Lila was given the honor of lighting the first lantern, standing on the same stage where she had once faced Amos's scorn. She looked out at the crowd with newfound confidence. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you for seeing me, not just what I look like. And thank you for letting me see all of you too." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing across the square. That night, as the lanterns floated into the starry sky, Hannah and Jake sat on the porch, watching the warm glow fade into the distance. "Do you think we'll leave?" Jake asked, his voice quiet. Hannah sighed, her gaze distant. "I don't know. Part of me feels like we've found what we needed here, but another part wonders if there's more waiting for us beyond these hills." Jake nodded. "Whatever you decide, you won't face it alone." Inside, Lila sat by the fire, flipping through a book filled with drawings of flowers. She paused, tracing her fingers over a picture of a sunflower, its petals bright and bold. "Mama," she called out, "do you think sunflowers always grow where they're planted?" Hannah smiled, stepping into the room. "Sometimes they do, and sometimes they grow where the light takes them." As the fire crackled and the village settled into quiet, Lila's question hung in the air, a reminder that the future was wide open, waiting to be written.